What is the best way to learn a language? That is going to depend on your time and resources that you have available and the strategies and techniques that you use to learn your language, depending on which language you're learning, whether that is your second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. The strategies and techniques is going to guide us into our time and resources. So we're going to start there to get a picture of how we learn, then look at practically how we can fit that in and how we can prioritize our learning based on our time and resources. So let's start with our strategies and techniques for learning a language. First, let's look at what works and what doesn't this time with this language that you're learning, because each time you learn a different language, your strategies and techniques will need to adjust. At this moment in time, a strategy might work for you, and then you might try it later on with the same language and it might not work. With this in mind, our language learning strategies for, let's say, our second language are going to be focusing on learning how to learn language as well as learning that language. As we progress through that language, we'll go through our different levels, our beginner, intermediate, advanced, and everything in between. And the techniques that you use at the beginner level, those are not necessarily going to be appropriate at the advanced or the intermediate level. Those can change, and they should change and evolve as you progress through your language. Then if you are to learn a third language after that, your skills are going to be different. Your skills that you already have, and then the strategies and techniques that you use will be different for that third language. The important thing to keep in mind here is that these skills do not work forever with every language. As I mentioned, with those different languages, your second versus your third, those skills are not going to be the same, because when you're learning a second language, you are reprogramming your brain to learn how to learn language, to understand all of the intricacies that go along with learning a language. Whereas when you learn a third language, you ideally already know these. You understand how to learn a language, you have a second language and a first language, so your brain is already operating on a language learning level. And now all that you're doing is layering on another language. So it should be easier learning your third language if that language is similar to your second language. If it's way different from your second language, it'll still be applicable to use some of the strategies for language learning for that other language, but you'll also need to come up with entirely new techniques for learning that language. Let's say you learn Spanish and then you decide to learn Mandarin Chinese, and now you can't just jump right into vocabulary and grammar. Instead, you have to learn the characters, the pronunciation. You have to go through a whole different set of skills. Once you do that, now you have that in your skill set of your strategies that you can use. But that process is completely different than if you were to learn French. If you were to learn French after learning Spanish, it's much easier because they're both Romance languages. They both have verb conjugations, very similar structures. There are some intricacies of French that maybe don't exist within Spanish that you have to learn and create new techniques for learning, but it's pretty simple to layer those languages and even to use Spanish to learn French, to take your French classes in Spanish, learn French, and have your skills transfer from one language to the other because they are so similar. Lastly, we're going to look at your time and resources. So keeping in mind everything that goes into learning a language with those skills and strategies and techniques and everything that you do to practice and study, looking at your time and resources. What is actually available to you? This is essentially a time versus cost analysis. You're looking at, do you have more time or do you have more money to dedicate to your language learning? Either one is fine. Way you can learn a language all the way to fluency. It's just a matter of how you're going to approach it. If you are looking to learn faster and you have less time and you have the resources, you have the money to do it, then investing in courses, investing in tutors, in bi-weekly classes with those tutors and courses, all of those things will help you to learn more quickly, especially if you don't know what you're doing when you're getting started. And then of course you have to maximize this time by doing your own work outside of those classes, and that's where either way you're going to be studying independently, because that's what it takes to learn a language. But when you have those classes with a private teacher, then you have that direct instruction that is tailored to you, and you have a person to ask all of your questions that come up, and then you have someone else to look up all of the resources, anything that you need to guide you through that process. So that can really expedite your language learning journey to fluency by having that teacher to work with on a regular basis. And then as you do your own work, how much you work on your own ultimately determines how quickly you progress. There is, of course, also the immersion option, which I did not mention on the blog post, but the immersion option, which I did when I was in college, is going to a foreign country and being in that language all the time, taking classes, going to school there, being around the native speakers and just speaking it all the time. This is of course a more costly option than studying on your own at home, but extremely effective and an amazing way to learn in a short period of time, because you are putting in all of the hours in a shorter amount of time. So you're putting in all of those hours in, say, a month time frame, you are practicing that language. Whereas if you are studying at home, outside of that language immersion environment, it takes more time, because your only practice with that language is when you are exposed to it through your studying or with your tutor or with your classes. So a lot of options there in different levels of how you can maximize your time by paying for assistance with tutors, with courses, with immersion, and you don't have to do all of them. You can pick and choose, do a tutoring session here and there, much more affordable way to integrate some of that in. And we're going to now look at the cheaper way, which is to do everything yourself, which I have never done. I don't advise entirely working by yourself, because it is nice to have at least a little bit of guidance. But let's say you're starting language from the beginning, and the beginning of learning a language is mostly just studying, memorization. If you have the skill set and you have the dedication and organization to go through all of those basics of the language you're learning and just learn them all, then you can save quite a bit of money going through it that way, and then maximize your time practicing with conversation partners, with a tutor. Once you get to a level where you can speak, you can do like conversation practice with a tutor, which is less of a class and more of a guided speaking. It's different than just going to that country or just working with a conversation partner, because when you work with a tutor in conversation practice, they can guide you in specific vocabulary and practicing that in conversation. They can offer you like a list of corrections at the end. These are where you're making your speaking mistakes so you can improve. It is more feedback and more structured. So that is definitely something that I always aim to incorporate into any of my language learning practices. is that conversation time with a tutor. At the very least, a conversation exchange with a native speaker. If you're going the free route, you can still do it. You can still learn language pretty much completely for free if you're willing to do the work and willing to put in extra time. Because the conversation exchange, then you are switching that language, you're helping them practice their language, and that is some of your time. And then with the resources, anything you need for books, for apps, anything that you are needing to learn that language, you then need to find yourself. You have to be able to put together your own language learning plan and to follow through with it and to understand everything that you're doing and to look up any parts that you don't understand and find a way to troubleshoot any concepts that you are needing to improve your understanding in. So that is the cheaper or free route to language learning versus the paid route to language learning, and which one is right, which one is best, that's up to you. I like a blend of the two, and to just pick and choose from each side depending on the language, depending on what's appropriate at that time in my life for that language. As I mentioned, your strategies change over the months, over the years with each language. It's always going to be a little bit different, and you can play around with it and find your best way for learning a language. Alright, that is it. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll see you guys back here next time. Bye!